I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM Podcast.
And welcome back to the RPM Podcast. And today, Alex and I will be talking about Alfa Romeo and how they did in the 2021 season. To summarise, Alfa Romeo scored 13 points, which is that better than last year? No, it is better than last year because they scored 8 points in 2020, 13 points in 2021, split between Antonio Giovinazzi and Kimi Raikkonen. 3 points for Antonio and 10 points for Kimi Raikkonen. It's really hard for me, let's get into the conversation now. It's really hard for me to summarise Alfa Romeo's season because they're a very absent team. And I hope you understand what I mean by that, because actually across all the teams on the field, I feel like we see the least of Alfa Romeo out of any team. We just don't see much of them at all on or off the track. They're very quiet on social media compared to other teams. They don't get much TV time. And well, the whole team is kind of a bit like Kimi Raikkonen, 1 word or 2 word answers, and then that's it for the press. It's interesting. So, Alex, take it away. What's your thoughts on Alfa Romeo and their drivers this year?
Well, they did score more points than last year, like you say, but I think they've still got to be disappointed with this season because they also finished 9th instead of 8th, like they did last time. Yeah. In testing in Bahrain, it looked like they had made some improvements on the previous year's car, the C39. And were at times pretty close on pace with their Ferrari engine suppliers. So there was some hope for them making another push up the grid. But despite having an overall better package across the season than their Williams rivals, they managed just 13 points and didn't really capitalise on some decent qualifying positions and ended up second from the bottom by the end. Giovinazzi, for example, started in the top 10 4 times, including an excellent 7th in Zandvoort. But bagged just 3 points across the whole season. So, the opportunities were there for him, but for whatever reason, it couldn't make it stick in the positions that he'd qualified into. And they just seem to be struggling with a few behind-the-scenes issues as well. Most notably, Sauber chairman Pascal Pichi, I think I'm pronouncing that right, stepped away after being unhappy, with the driver decisions for 2022. He said that he didn't want to be associated with the management of Frederic Vasseur. Seemed to be not very happy about the way the drivers were picked. And it seemed to be more to do with Bottas than Zhou, as I understand it. It's all a little bit hazy and based on, he said, she said sort of stuff. But, and the team themselves also admitted that they were making a few too many stupid mistakes that were costing their chances at points. It's important to mention that similarly to Haas, they were focusing on their 2022 car early on in the season. But they were surrounded by teams that were doing much the same and still lost out. So it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity to push a little bit further up. There was also the talk that they might sell to Andretti Autosport. That never came to fruition. And they're the only driver this year that had to bring in their reserve driver as well, I believe, because Kubica stood in for Raikkonen when he was tested positive for COVID-19, because Haas obviously didn't get a chance to replace Mazepin because the rules state that you've got to have a driver take part in at least one practice session, which includes qualifying, before you can enter them for the race. So yeah, they're the only team that brought in their reserve driver. So yeah, I think it's a season of missed opportunities for Alfa Romeo. As in general, I think their car probably was a bit better than the Williams over the course of the season.
I completely agree, because let's focus on Antonio Giovinazzi, for example. His best race finish was 2 points. That's 9th place in Saudi Arabia, quite late on in the season. Up until that point, he'd only scored in 1 race. But like you said, I think the Alfa Romeo car was on pace faster than the Williams, but Williams took advantage of the situation way more than Alfa Romeo did. I think Alfa Romeo's strategy let them down, because looking at Antonio's record now, he's finished 12th on a handful of occasions. He's finished 11th on a handful of occasions and 13th on so many occasions. And these are results which are better than the average finishing position of the Williams car and the Latifi and George, because they're getting Antonio got so close to the points on so many occasions, but the strategy just let them down. And I think that's where the biggest problem was, because these guys did have a faster race car, but they just didn't utilize it as much as the Williams did. They didn't utilize that strategy, because didn't realise, apart from looking at it now on this post-season review, how many times Antonio got so close to the points but just didn't manage to do it. It's such a shame. And I'm glad that he managed to pick up an extra 2 points in Saudi Arabia, because it kind of ended his season on a bit of a high, because he didn't obviously finish the race in Abu Dhabi. So his last full outing, he actually managed to score points. I think he's a very good driver. I think he joined Formula One at the wrong time. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of very good drivers. And obviously that car just isn't what they want it to be. Maybe if he had joined a couple of years later with the new regulations going forward, the playing field might be a little bit closer, and he might have been able to outperform some drivers, potentially around his level, but he was never given that opportunity. And I don't think we'll see him in Formula One again as much as he wants to come back.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this was the season for him to break out of his relative anonymity on the grid, and he just didn't quite do it. I mean, it became pretty clear about halfway through the season that the Italian was fighting for a seat in F1 rather than just performing for his team. And he just didn't quite deliver enough despite he had a respectable qualifying record, but he'd never really converted it. And I think he did have the opportunities. He gave himself those opportunities by qualifying well and didn't convert them. As you mentioned already, his best result came in Jeddah, managing P9, and you can't really fault his consistency, even if it wasn't a consistency that got him many points. He was generally accident-free in the races, as far as I can recall. And he finished between 12th and 15th 14 times across the season.
Wow.
So he was always in that little pocket just before the points started.
So close.
But again, it was the story not just of this year, but I think of every year that he's been in the sport, which is that he wasn't bad, but he wasn't really that exciting a prospect either. And it was remarked on several occasions that he was F1's most anonymous driver. He does have the best hair on the grid, that much I can say. But he's been in Formula One for this was his third season.
Yeah, I feel bad that I don't know the answer to that, because he's been so anonymous, and it's not good when you're anonymous in Formula One. You need to be out there. You need to be showing what you can do. Whether that goes into mistakes or not, you need to be proving that you're willing to take those risks.
Yeah, he's had that opportunity to do it. I think he has now had plenty of time.
Yeah.
There's some talk about him maybe coming back, but there's so much competition for seats in Formula One, and I'm not sure if he brings lots of sponsorship with him or anything. I think if I were a team principal, I would not feel super comfortable gambling on it when there's so much talent coming through the feeder series and other prospects. I think he might have lost his chance to get back in, but you never know. We'll see. Yeah, it is his third season. Yeah,
3 seasons in Formula One. He just hasn't really shown at any point what he can do, and it's a real shame. Moving on to the second most anonymous driver on the grid through choice, Kimi Raikkonen, scored 10 points this year, which is considerably more than his teammate. His best finish was at 8th place finish, and that was in Russia and in Mexico. Now, Russia was obviously a bit of a strange race, a late downpour, but obviously Alfa Romeo, this was one of the races they did get the strategy right, and they managed to box Kimi in and put him out on intermediates or wets. I can't remember what the choice was, and he scored a handful of points, and in Mexico as well. So that's great. But as for Kimi Raikkonen, it's his last year in Formula One, and it will probably be his last year in Formula One. No returns planned. I think he made that very clear towards the end of the 2021 season. We've just seen a clip on the F1 YouTube. It was their bold predictions for the 2021 season, very similar to ours. And I think Kimi's favourite moment, or predicted favourite moment, would be the Abu Dhabi race, because he would be retiring afterwards. And that makes sense. He's changed his Instagram bio now to retired. He's done. I don't think we'll see him in the sport. I don't think we'll even see him in the paddock, because I just think he's out. He wants out now. He's done his time. He wants out. Kimi Raikkonen's year, how would you describe it, apart from absent?
Well, yeah, like you said, I don't think it was too surprising that it was his final year. And honestly, he really looked like he'd rather be somewhere else at times. I know that's kind of part of his whole public persona, but he was clearly very unhappy with the team at times, and it must have been frustrating to join an outfit with midfield potential in 2019. somewhere to get some good racing in the twilight of your career, only to see the team then slump in 2 consecutive seasons to the back of the field. I think his qualifying performances left a lot to be desired. He failed to get out of Q1 11 times. And I know that the car, it was by no means one of the better cars on the grid, but Giovinazzi's record was much better, and Raikkonen has so much experience behind him and historically has been a great qualifier. So yeah, he didn't connect with the car, a sort of natural depreciating of talent, if you like. But that's even with missing 2 race weekends due to COVID. He also had a few contacts throughout the season. There was that bizarre collision with his teammate on the straight in Portugal. Do you remember that, where he just drifted across and hit him?
Yeah.
Don't really understand what happened there. Nearly took out both cars. That would have been a real embarrassment.
That was one of 2 races where he DNF'd. It was that and Abu Dhabi were the only 2 races he DNF'd this year.
Yeah, he had a pretty good finishing record. But you'd expect that for someone in his position, because
and it's been in Formula 1 for so long.
Yeah, especially as you can only assume that as drivers get a bit older, they probably also get a little bit more risk averse in ways. Like you start a family and all the rest of it, and you probably think a little bit more than the younger drivers. Maybe I don't want to throw it up the inside of here in case something happens. He also hit Leclerc at the French Grand Prix. He had that awkward run into Vettel in Jeddah, where I'm not really sure exactly what he was trying to do. It all felt like a slightly ignoble end to his career at times. And although he and his teammate were more or less equal in race outcomes, it was the Finns' results that garnered the most points ultimately, 10-3. So that's why I can't help but see, just looking at Giovinazzi again, I can't help but see him as being ultimately disappointing, because Raikkonen was also a bit of a letdown and really didn't look like he wanted to be there. And he's a world champion and, is the most experienced F1 driver in history. And Giovinazzi had a chance to kind of prove his youthful talent and exuberance against this old timer and just didn't. So you can't really blame Alfa Romeo for looking elsewhere. And I think that it remains to be seen how they do going into next year. Speaking of which, what do you expect out of them coming into 2022?
Well, you got there before I did, because that was going to be my question to you. It's difficult because we're starting off these podcasts with the lower end teams with not much financial backing and not great facilities back at headquarters or wherever they develop their cars. Alfa Romeo, like you said, have slowly slipped down the last couple of years from like a midfield team, and they're heading towards the back of the pack, especially with Williams kind of switching there, being quite lucky this year and moving up the pack especially. I do worry that maybe next year, despite the change in regulations, we might see a point this year. We might see even fewer points over next year. We've got a brand new driver going into that seat, and we've obviously got Valtteri Bottas as well, a very experienced driver. So we've almost the same kind of lineup in a sense that you've got the experienced driver, and then you've got a new driver willing to try and prove themselves. So I don't know, it's an odd one. Because we don't see much of Alfa Romeo and they're not very open. We don't see them don't see much about their team principles in the press pen too often, or I don't. It's very hard to gauge where they're going. They've got a Ferrari power unit, and obviously that's been proven to be quite good this year. And all the power units are staying the same for next year. So hopefully, with simpler aerodynamics and simpler designs, they'll push them into the midfield team. But that also goes to say the same for every other team around them. And I feel like every other team around them are making better leaps than they are at the moment, and that's where I think they'll struggle.
Yeah, I agree that they have a very uncertain future at this stage. If only that car was as fast as it looked, because it looks great.
Goodness.
I love the look of that Alfa Romeo, but I'm not convinced that they're going into the new regulations with a particularly strong hand. Valtteri Bottas is a good driver and a Grand Prix winner, but it remains to be seen if he has what it takes to elevate a team with some significant problems. And Guan Yu Zhou will obviously be a complete rookie, even off the back of his F3, was it the F3 Asian Championship he just won? It's an uncertain future for Alfa Romeo. They could take advantage of that strong Ferrari power unit and design a really good car, and Bottas will be in a position to be in a slightly maybe a slightly less stressful seat somewhere where he can release a bit of the pressure and enjoy himself a bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that he does enjoy it. He wouldn't be doing it otherwise, but he might find himself flourish a little bit at Alfa Romeo, but it doesn't feel like a guarantee. I struggle to look at Alfa Romeo in the next season and feel particularly positive about it. I hope that they do better, but it has been a long string of slumps in the last few years. So, yeah, an uncertain future for Alfa Romeo. Well, that's it for Alfa Romeo then. Do send us any thoughts or questions that you have to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. You can also get in touch on our website, raceperminute.com, or comment below if you're on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this episode, then do give us a rating or a like wherever it is that you're listening to us. If you really like what we do, then do consider subscribing on your podcast app or on YouTube, so that you can get all the episodes straight to you as they come out. And if you really want to support the show, the best way to do that is to go to patreon.com/raceperminute, where for as little as £1 a month, you can support what we do, get yourself some lovely rewards, etc. We've got a few more episodes to go next. Next, we'll be talking about Williams and how they've been doing in 2021. So I do hope that you'll join us for that. See you then.
See you then.